I plan to make this informal, so if you have any questions about anything, feel free to just lob it out there. We have some, notice they have some stuffed turtles here. These are from law enforcement and donations and stuff. There's a couple varieties of species in here. Leatherbacks, I'm assuming the big skull is right there. But today I'm going to talk mostly about green turtles here in Hawaii, what we call honu, right? And you can see them right out there, right out in the bay. We've actually caught them out there as recently as January. We come here about 4 times a year and do some work. And of course, we worked with them over the last 30-ish years on the strandings, and just 6 turtle in here. We come and take care of them, stuff like that. But that's good. My test for a good presentation is if you can see this NOAA badge up here. Right, so that's like my little watermark I put on there to see if the colors are right. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to take this down and send me an email. My first name, got my last name at NOAA.gov. Before I want to show you, we do a lot of things when you're doing sea turtle research. We do climate change work. We do some historical reconstructions. We do some basic life history stuff, and this isn't a climate change thing. So this is I won't get into all of this, but the point is that when you try to understand how sea turtle populations are changing over time, they are a lot more like fish than they are like mammals. Okay, and so this slide sort of exemplifies that. If you look in the top, you can see. Before I get to that, this is the proportion of their lifespan on this axis, and this is their abundance over time. So this is like if you followed a cohort over time, like 1,000 animals born at the same time, and this is till the last one dies, and that's their abundance. So you can kind of see how different populations work. Some populations and some species will put tons of energy into one offspring. And physical metabolic energy, invest a lot in that. The animal may not, it may require a lot of parenting, a lot of apprenticeship, and then at some point the animal goes off to do its own thing and matures, and they may live to like 100 years. That's people. That's humans. Okay. Contrast that strategy with a sea turtle that offers 0 parenting, puts about 1,000 offspring every 4 years or so. 0 investment, never sees them again, and there's very low survivorship, right? So that's a totally different strategy. The thing with that second strategy I just told you, it's in this group down here, leatherback sea turtles, humboldt, squid, striped bass, and conch. They're very similar in their dynamics, and the males are kind of up top, and then there's some birds and reptiles in between. The point of me telling you this is if you're not a scientist and understand what's going on in the grass, is that this group right here is very sensitive to changes in climate because of that structure. So when you think about climate change, this massive geopolitical issue, like what do we do about it, right? There's so many inputs, there's so many consequences socially and ecologically and economically. Well, how do we deal with that? How do we understand it? Well, most people, when they study climate change, what they're doing is they're tracking some ecological shift. Like this butterfly lands on this flower and it pollinates it and it gets its food. And now the flower is popping up in January, but the butterfly's not popping out of its cocoon until March, and there's this mismatch now. Well, all those things are true. Every species is influenced by climate, but from the environmental changes. But some species are more sensitive than others. And that's what this is meant to show. Turtles are a lot more like squid than they are like orcas. And for some people, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, especially if you have like a turtle tattoo, because I have not seen anyone have a squid tattoo yet, but I have seen some orca tattoos and some whale tails, stuff like that. Not pop, maybe Northwest, a lot more whale tails than out here. So that's the point of this. So what is going on in that top, that picture? First of all, how many people in Hawaii are visiting? Who lives here? Okay, so pretty much everyone. You don't have a choice. Okay. Well, nobody has an excuse then. What's going on in the top picture right there?
Eggs. Yes.
Not eggs.
Live?
It's alive.
Basking.
Basking, yes. Now, why is a turtle's on a beach. So these are 3 possibilities. There's a significant problem. It's a female laying eggs, or it's basking. Now, basking green turtles happens everywhere or doesn't happen everywhere?
Only here.
Does happen in a few other places, but this is the main place that happens here in Hawaii. So we just published this paper last week. We shouldn't say in review anymore. It's published. Last week came out. Article in Science about it. We might be on the news. We might be in the morning news this week on the TV, which would be kind of strange. But it's about this. We figured out why they're doing it. They basically they have this solar panel on their back, and their lungs are right below the shell. So they can actually, they're reptiles, so they don't generate their own body temperature. They respond to the environmental temperature. So in Hawaii, even though we have like this beautiful oceans and green mountains and blue skies and nice green tropical waters, the water here is actually cold. So those of you guys who have the towels on your neck, is the water? It's very cold. But that's different kind of cold, right? That's just because it's the season, right? But actually, compared to Florida, where they also have a lot of green turtles, they have a lot of hurricanes there. We don't have a lot of hurricanes in Hawaii. And the main reason we don't have hurricanes in Hawaii is the same reason these turtles are basking. Because the water here is actually relatively cold by comparison to where most green turtles are. Yeah. Hurricanes need that warm, moist air that comes off of the warm ocean from the Gulf Stream, the Gulf of Mexico, some of the hottest water on the planet. As a result, hurricanes that go through there just pick up that hot, moist air. It's like rock fuel. Katrina hits the Florida Panhandle, goes into the Gulf of Mexico in 2003 or whatever it was, 2005, and 2005, and just turns into a crazy storm, right? Hurricanes, when they come out to Hawaii, we had 3 this year. It's super rare, and that just really never happened before. They hit this cold water right here, and they just go, and they just disappear, right? Well, these turtles are actually cold, and that's why they're basking. They also bask in the Galapagos and in a part of Western Australia, where the water's also cold. I'll talk about that in a second. But so here is a monitoring of basking turtles, and this is up in the North Shore. This is like Turtle Beach, right? If you've ever been there. And if you notice, I took the ocean temperature. This is from a satellite, and I flipped it. So this is cold, and this is hot. And so if you look at over a 6-year period, you basically see the water gets cold, cold, cold. The turtles bask more. The water gets warmer. The turtles stop basking. 6 years in a row I could do this, right? But even though you have not studied this before, you can follow this one. Now, when we look at it in a different way, here we have Hawaii is right here. This is in the North Pacific. This is Galapagos in the East Pacific, and then the Indo-Pacific. This is West Australia. These are 11 green turtle populations globally. 3 of them bask. The 3 that bask are right here, and this is their temperatures. The box you see is the winter temperature. And what's interesting about Hawaii, I told you it's cold. It has the lowest ceiling. In other words, the warmest it ever gets here is the coldest of all the other populations. So it's the coldest hot here. But this is the Mediterranean. This is Turkey. This is a weird population. There's a couple of sea turtle species in the Mediterranean, but they're extremely small. They've been overhunted for a very long period of time. And you can see it gets a lot colder in Turkey because it's about 36 degrees north. It's, we're only about 22 in the NOAA right here. So it's a bit further north, but it also gets a lot hotter. So this is kind of an exception. They may have basked here historically, but they may have been hunted because of it. So if a turtle comes up on the beach, and someone's like, oh, dinner. There's my spear. So that's that. What's interesting when we look at these 11 different populations globally, and we compare it to the average temperature over the past 25 years, these sea turtle populations are warming at 3 times the global rate. So the global rate of warming in the oceans averaged over all the Earth since 1990. This is what the temperature is, the trend. Now, all these populations are warming at about 3 times that, and one population in West Africa is 6 times the average rate. So global warming is this thing. It's happening all over the planet in different ways, some accelerating really fast and slow. But for turtles, these main 11 populations are worse by 3 times than the global average. So we're tracking this in all its influences. If we're going to understand climate change, we have to understand how it's impacting organisms in very specific ways. Basking is just one thing they're doing. And they're actually responding to cold. So what we think is they actually may stop basking here in the next 25, 30 years because the water's going to be warming up. They may not need a bass anymore.
Well,
Yeah.
I live on the North Shore, and I noticed that most of the turtles that bask are big adults. And I'm wondering why the smaller ones don't come out very often, because it seems like they would hold this.
At Laniakea?
Ones. Well, more in Waialua, in that
Okay.
area.
So in different areas, it's different. You know, in some places you get smaller ones and big ones. In the northwestern Hawaiian Islands,
Right.
where it's significantly colder, turtles of all sizes out there. So I think there's probably some idiosyncrasies in different beaches on Maui. You know, and you may say, well, you said if the oceans may be getting warmer, they may stop basking. But what I've seen in the last 30 years, since I've been watching it, is the numbers have actually gone up. Well, I think what you're seeing there is the population is actually growing. So you're just seeing a signal of the population growth, not a signal of the environment changing. So those are good questions. We don't see any demographic trends in that, like boys versus girls, adults versus kids. Yeah. So this is a hawksbill shell, and here's a hawksbill too. This is a real animal that was. This looks like it was confiscated by law enforcement. I've worked a lot with these kind of specimens. I've seen hundreds of them from. There's a room in every law enforcement office where somebody in a badge and uniform says, "Oh, hey, you're interested in turtles? Come to this room." And then we open this door and there's like dozens of them. I've been to one place, an unnamed federal office in Oregon, where we went to some nondescript storage center on the outside of town, and well, this was prearranged. I know they had a lot there, but it wasn't just some random thing. And we went there and they opened it up, and it was a massive warehouse full of polar bears and turtles and cheetahs and tigers and all sorts of animals. And so you're kind of at one hand, you're like, wow, this is amazing. And then you're immediately like really sad because these animals should be like running around in the jungles and swimming in the oceans and stuff like that. But we can actually do science on these animals, and that's what we're trying to do. This is an animal that's from the Bishop Museum that we at the Pacific Island Fisheries Science Center gave to the Bishop Museum. It's a hawksbill, and I popped that little piece, it's this little piece right here above the tail. It's called the posterior marginal scoot. And it's made of like the same thing your fingernails or your hair is made of, keratin. So what you see here, I popped that off because what I can do is I can cut a little sliver out of this and polish it up with a little gemstone wheel. And you can see these beautiful little lines on there. So this is not doctored in any way. And actually, you can see here my impatience because I polished this up to see it. But all these little striations that are running counter to the grain that didn't polish it long enough, I was like, I want to see what it looks like, I want to see what it looks like. So I popped it on the microscope too. I'll get this picture out of here. But that line, that really dark line you see here, this is the carapace right here. And this is called the plastron. And where the carapace and the plastron meet is this particular scoop. They come together. I have one of these posterior marginals on an adult turtle that's 4 inches long. This is a cross section like that. If I just showed you this picture and I said, what is this? You would say a maple tree from Massachusetts, right? And you would not be wrong for thinking that. It's a growth line markings on here, right? This line right here is like a suture line between the top carapace and the bottom plastron. Tends to be that the top there is really dark and kind of melanized, and the bottom's really blonde. But this animal is not eaten. Green turtles, which we'll talk about in a second, were eaten for food. And you hear everything about how wonderful they are, just like veal and all this stuff. And I always say, like, well, first of all, it's illegal. Second of all, why are you referencing veal? You know, it's something that a lot of people would be like referencing foie gras or something like that. So, but at any rate, this animal was variously not eaten, although you hear indigenous populations in some places say, talk about how they ate them, because they were, it's kind of like Russian roulette. You can die from it, from the poisons that are in the meat, because their diet is not algae and seagrass. Their diet is sponges and other things that are toxic to us. They can process them. They actually eat glass. And we can't get away with that for obvious reasons. But there's toxins in there. So about once a year, we get a report from some Pacific Islander dying from eating a hawksbill. But they were not traded for their meat. They were traded for this. They were traded for that. Basically a semi-precious stone. So this is like money swimming around in the water. It's not dinner. And so if you look back in history, we're doing some things trying to reconstruct the trade, but there's logical information here. What it ate, where it was from. Now, like I said, I've had hundreds of these before, so I can look at this and I'd be like, Philippines, 1992. It's not because it's written on there, okay? But I've seen so many of these. I know where this turtle's from. I know how it was made. There are shops where there's dozens of these just sitting out there. And you buy it and you're like, hey, it's kind of cool, I'll buy it. And you put your suitcase back to Honolulu and you're like, excuse me, sir, can you step over here for a second? You know, and you have to go in a room and explain that. And you're like, why don't you declare this? You know, it's illegal, it's $10,000 fine. Or you can just give it to us. And they're like, oh, I'll speak to you. And then you give it to Hanauma Bay, and that's great. So one of the things we're trying to do with this is figure out how old the turtles are. And one of the kind of interesting things inside information inside the shell is nuclear activity, actually. They did a lot of bomb testing out here in the Pacific, and there's this natural curve in all living things with carbon in them. There's 3 kinds of carbon, 3 different isotopes. One of those isotopes, carbon-14, is actually from bomb testing, nuclear bomb testing. And this really ramped up in the 50s. And so if we have animals, we can place the animal how old it is by where it fits on that curve. So even if I didn't have an idea that this animal is from like 1993 in the Philippines, every place has their own curve because of testing and the ocean currents and the atmospheric circulation and how that works. It's different than Hawaii, it's different than American Samoa. It's different than China, it's different than the Indian Ocean. But once we know kind of where it's from or we have a given idea, which we can find out a few other ways, we can actually figure out how old the animal was. And we're using this. We've done some of these. I'll go back for a second. What we do is we just take we drill a little line along the machine that your dentist used to take out your cavities. And then we take that dust and we send it to a lab and then we analyze how much of that radioactive carbon is in there, and then we can figure out what date that line is from, and then we can do a bunch of those for individual turtles, and we can see throughout their life how long they've lived and stuff. It's actually pretty fun. This we go back and we actually, I said I've taken apart hundreds of these things before. Records, this was traded, most of them went to Japan because they had a whole industry of making things like these little bracelets right here. And you know, if you have tortoiseshell glasses that used to be like your glasses, maybe that's probably plastic, but they're made out of, they used to be made out of tortoiseshell. It's very expensive. But they have records going back to the 1840s of trade from Fiji, Solomon Islands, Australia, Hawaii, going to Japan. But it's always in economic terms, like pounds or kilograms of these plates. So what we've gone back to is we've figured out like a turtle this big produces about 33 grams of tortoiseshell, whereas a turtle this big could produce about 2.5 grams. And so we can actually go back to these harvest records and turn them into the numbers of turtles. And we're doing that right now. So it looks like about almost 3 million hawksbills were slaughtered between 1900 and 1980 and sent in the trade to Japan. Interestingly, in Hawaii, these hawksbills are very small in number today. About a few years ago is you see the map up in the upper right. It's the main Hawaiian Islands, and then in the upper left there's the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. These animals actually Hawaiian Islands historically and today, and that's not something that anyone had ever known. We went back into mined historical records, ship captains, naturalists, Navy records. You know, Hawaii was a place that in the 1800s had hundreds of newspapers. It was kind of a unique thing. That was a very unique thing about Honolulu. They, one of these records I got from, where is it, Uvalde Morel? Damon record from 1872. That's from a Quaker newspaper called The Friend. And it was published here in Honolulu, and they just had this mention. A ship went up to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and brought home a lot of tortoiseshell. And so these things are just kind of mentioned, but it's actually data that we can use to understand it. Before this publication, no one had really said there was any significant presence of hawksbills in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. But we've gone back and found nesting records up there. We found 3 records. This one's from the tsunami. They got up there. This is from a crew looking for oysters in Midway from UC Santa Barbara. This one was caught in a ghost fishing net that some monk seal researchers were up there, and they just walked on the shore like, hey, look at that net. Hey, there's a turtle in there. Hey, it's a hawksbill. Let's get a picture. you know? So you have some of these records that pop up, you start to get the picture emerging. Here's that they were harvested pretty heavily in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They went straight to Japan, didn't come back to Honolulu. And so it wasn't recorded very well, but there's actually quite a bit of information. So we said, well, what's a lot of tortoiseshell? So we had a seizure from the Fish and Wildlife Service gave us about 4 boxes of plates. And so we went through and it was from Mexico. They tried to come in Arizona or something like that. They confiscated it. But we went back and we said, well, a ship comes back with a lot of tortoiseshell. How many turtles is that? Well, we said, well, if we could stack all those plates, because what they always did was they just ripped the plates off. You can, not when the turtle's alive. The turtles are usually dead. But what they do is they put it out in the sun and they kind of pop off after. But what we did is we said, well, how many turtles plates, how many scoop plates from the back of the carcass could we fit into a square meter box? Just for some sort of metric. 600 turtles, because they flatten out and they're actually kind of thin and you can stack them up. And so what's a lot of tortoiseshell? Well, if you can fit 600 turtles scoots into 1 square meters, cubic meters, actually kind of big. But at any rate, just to give you a frame of reference. So this is green turtles, and this is a huge success story. This is the number of nesting turtles in French frigate shoals in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. This is in 1972, when the monitoring first began in a systematic way by NOAA. And there's this kind of little cycle over time. It kind of gets a little shorter, it gets a little longer. The number goes up and up. And then last year was the most we've ever seen. It was over 870. 870 females breeding that year. Great story. But it's not the only part of the story. And so what you see in this trend right here kind of reveals a lot about what you want to see. So some people see this and think, well, we should take the green turtle off the endangered species list. Clearly, it does not need any more protection. And some people say, well, what is this number right here? Is this like a good situation or is this a bad situation? So if I want to know what that is, I kind of have to know first what that. This is going up. What was this situation to begin with? What's your baseline, right? So people interpret this different ways. So I want to sort of dissect this a little bit. So, but bottom line, it's a great success story. Endangered Species Act was affected, harvesting and hunting ended, and the numbers came back. So one of the lessons you take from this, I think it's pretty unambiguous, you put questions and you stop harvesting, the population will rebound. And that's good.
Kyle?
Yeah.
Are the low points because the turtles don't go each year?
They don't go every year, and we think they're environmentally cued. So they go one turtle nests probably every 3 to 5 years. And in this population, it's about 4.0 years. It's pretty close to 4. So, but they all don't go in the same year. They don't sync up perfectly, but there is a lot of syncing. And we think that a female, for her laying 800 eggs in a season is quite energy intensive. She drops a lot of yolk. It's quite a bit of energy. She can't do that every year. And we think that happens after winters that are very productive. So you have a really productive winter, there's a lot of food, there's a lot of excess metabolism she can drop into yolk. But that doesn't happen every year. But some turtles, I think it's only happened once where a turtle went in 2 successive years. Considering all the time and all turtles that have come, that's quite a rarity, but it has happened.
One question.
Yeah.
If they lay a clutch or whatever, can't they do another one 2 weeks later?
They do. They lay about 4 or 5 a year, but then they won't come back for 4 or 5 years. So yes, that's correct. So they'll lay one nest, wait 2 weeks, lay another nest, wait 2 weeks, do that. Yeah. So here's a map of the Hawaiian Islands. This is from our historical. This is from today. This is looking at the distribution of nesting. I mentioned earlier that there are 11 green turtle global populations. I just served on this group. Status review team for the Endangered Species Act for green turtles. We went through all 11 global populations. We went through the genetic data establishing that there are 11 populations. The satellite tracking is showing there's this kind of neat little how they separate out. But this population is globally unique in that it doesn't have the extensive portfolio of nesting sites that you do in the Caribbean, or in Australia, or in the Indian Ocean. We have 97% of the turtles in this population nest at that one spot. That is not even close to the concentrations that we had it much more diversely spread out in other places. This concentration is unprecedented globally. So what we see here, just right off the bat, without looking at the abundance, just the geographic distribution of where the turtles are nesting today. There's some turtles nesting in Molokai, not very many, less than 20 a year. And this is the average, by the way, over the since 1973. Today, like I said, last year there was 870 French frigate. Laysan, Speed Pearl, Hermes, maybe 10 turtles a year, but about 400. So this concentration of French frigate is by far the most significant place for this population, and no other population in the world has that kind of geographic concentration. So what we did, I mentioned we did this historical stuff with hawksbills. We also did that for greenies. And so we looked at harvest records, nesting records, basking records, stuff like that, even back to the first into Captain Cook's expedition, right? They mentioned turtles on there. So do you think when we go back and we look at the nesting records that they're going to look like this? That they're all going to be concentrated on French frigate shoals as well? Now, by the way, this map is a lot more spread out. I don't know if you can see this, but it says 700 kilometers, 600 kilometers is big. This is right in the middle of the archipelago, but it's pretty spread out. So this is what the records look like when we go back. So first of all, there's all the global nesting sites for all the different places. And the biggest circle on there is 100,000 females in that population alive. The X's are places we know where they nest, but we don't know how many nest there because it's so remote. So you see a lot of those in the South Pacific. I should be using this. This is Hawaii, obviously, right? So we have all these tiny, tiny sites where we get maybe one turtle a year, and then we have French frigate. It's a log scale, so it's not like, it makes them look closer together than they really are, because otherwise we'd have these big, big circles and these little tiny dots. So you can see green turtles all over the place, right? They don't go further north in nesting than about, well, except for this Mediterranean. That's the one weird place I mentioned to you. Everything else is pretty further south. So some places go up to, I think we have a few random things of small nonce turtles in North Carolina and Virginia. This is, again, all green turtles. This is a place, where are we here? This is Rose Atoll in American Samoa. This is in the Cook Islands, French Polynesia. This is Pitcairn. Has anyone ever heard of Pitcairn Island? We know there's turtles out there nesting. We don't know how many. West Africa, Central Africa. West Africa is pretty big. Ascension Island. These are kind of places you hear about only in like Mariner's Tales. But here's Hawaii. 97% at that one spot. Nothing else even comes close to that. So this is what the map looks like today. That's what it looks like historically. Much more spread out. Now, when we go back historically, we don't have the data quality. We didn't have people camping out, taking data like scientists. So our scale is different. It's just that there's nesting recorded, there's nesters recorded, and it's abundant enough to have been regularly harvested. And then there's several mentions, repeated mentions that nesting is highly abundant in that place. So it was so abundant, it wasn't just harvested, but every time they mentioned it, they said, there's a lot of turtles here, you should come here. Now, one of the huge surprises is Lanai, in this place called Polihua on northwest Lanai. We know that there's many newspaper articles about people going there as recently as 1925 and taking expeditions with their families there to go there and camp and kill turtles because there was so many turtles there. This is like a common practice, right? This is in many parts of the world we go to, people eat turtles. And I think that one of the things in our culture right now, it's not really palatable to eat turtles, right? And not necessarily like if it was placed in front of you, you didn't know what it was, you wouldn't find it tasty. That's not it. It's just that's not culturally really acceptable. But it's very widespread in so many places in the world, right? And I think it's what's important for us is to kind of take a step back and just realize that in our culture that it's not really acceptable now. But in a lot of places, if the population supports it and the government allows it and it's sustainable, what's wrong with it, right? But here it's illegal, and so we should just stop right there because it's not legal. But the question is, if it were legal, would it be sustainable? So we do actually have some fishery records to address that question. But first, I think you just kind of need to appreciate this map and kind of sit in front of it a second and say, there's a lot of white circles on there, and they're not small. and they're all over the place. Now, when it comes back to climate, and I mentioned there's so many different ways that climate change can affect things. The historical population went from about 19 degrees north all the way up to 28, all the way up to Curie. So you have 19 to 28 degrees of latitude of climate variability. Now, you basically have just that. I mean, there are these other places here, and if you haven't paid attention, there's scattered reports of a lot of turtles nesting, a lot of reports, but not many turtles. In Lahaina, over on Makapu'u. So these scattered reports of turtles nesting, turtles nesting in different places. Anyone ever heard about this or seen this? Right, it's happening. Those turtles all have very close genetic signatures. And they are an aberrant group from French frigate shoals. So from this population right here, it's not like turtles nest where they were born. So their genetic source is unique. All of the turtles nesting in the main Hawaiian Islands, and it's this aberrant group of French frigate shoals. So if they're programmed genetically, magnetically, they use this magnetite in their brain to navigate back to nest and breed where they were born. Why are turtles breeding in the main Hawaiian Islands? Well, if you just think about that, then you say they were born here. Well, how would they be born here if there weren't any nesting here? Well, back in the late 1960s, when it was okay to do so, some people took a group of sea turtles from French frigate shoals and brought them to Oahu and bred them, and it has held them captive at Sea Life Park. And every year, Sea Life Park releases hundreds of hatchlings into Makapu'u waters. And guess what? Where are they breeding? In the main Hawaiian Islands, on Oahu, on the Barrier Islands, the Rabbit Islands. I mean, you haven't had one breed here in Hanauma, have you? No. But they breed in Molokai. They go over to Maui. Their accuracy isn't sometimes within a few kilometers, sometimes within a few meters.
Is this good or bad?
It just is. It's all you're gonna hear from me say about that today. It just is. You know, it happens, and I don't think it's a huge evil. And you have turtles breeding in Hawaii. Historically, that was pretty common. Some people will get up in arms about the genetics issue. What are the turtles that bred down here are genetically a little bit different? I'm not a geneticist, so I don't really care about genetics as much. Personally, I mean, I really don't care about it. I'm not a geneticist, so I don't get up in arms about that. If I were, and I knew all the proclivities and the different kind of, they looked different, they acted different, they swam different, then maybe. I think probably that's not the case. The turtles in Hawaii are different than the turtles in Mexico, are different than the turtles in Australia. Breeding turtles, same species, different populations. They look different, they have different features. That level of difference in genetics, I think, is significant and important, and we need to appreciate. The level of difference between here and here, I'm not convinced of that yet. I remain willing to be convinced, but as of today, I'm not. So they're from Sea Life Park. So this is not a success story in terms of the population expanding from French frigate shoals. That's a big jump. They skipped Kauai and they went to Oahu. That's a big jump. This is shows from Sea Life Park. So if anyone says they're breeding in Hawaii today, it's great news. That's not the case. What is a huge tragedy is that we had a massive breeding colony on northwestern Lanai that was completely extirpated before World War II. It was here. I mean, people have pictures. You go to Bishop Museum and see records of it, and that was completely. So we had very significant nesting grounds. What's interesting if you think about that for a second, take a step back. That nesting ground survived the Hawaiian Kingdom. So in the Royal Kingdom days, there were people inhabiting all of these islands, and some of them were eating turtles. It was definitely a regulated species to eat. It was kapu for commoners to eat turtle. But that nesting area survived until 1930. So there are different views about the sustainability and the environmental practices of native Polynesians. And one of the things is some of these. Oh, here's. Is it going to pop up? may have lost my capability. Oh, good. I got it. I turned it off accidentally. See all these little black dots that popped up?
Yeah.
These are middens or archaeological discoveries of kitchen trash piles. So it didn't have, you didn't put your trash in like a gray bin and the dude truck shows up, takes it away back in 1700, right? You just kind of threw it into a big pile. And so what archaeologists have found across Oceania, which is like all of Polynesia, is that when you look at these middens, there's a three-dimensional structure that's like, right? And sometimes they're like 2 meters deep. And if you look at the top and you go down to the bottom, what's on the top is going to be the new stuff, and what's on the very bottom is going to be the stuff they ate when they first got there. Invariably, what you find when you look at middens across Oceania is on the bottom is turtle. And then it goes to birds, and then it goes to rats. And what we have in Hawaii is no different. On the very bottom of these trash piles are turtle bones. So there were definitely some low-hanging fruit, some turtles, maybe baskers, maybe nesting turtles. Notice there's no historical nesting on the Big Island of Hawaii, hawksbills or green turtles, even though we know people have lived there for probably the longest of any inhabited place in the Mid-Hawaiian Islands. Kauai had a kingdom, Oahu obviously did, Maui had a king, and Honolulu is actually believed. Some Hawaiian language historians think that Honolulu is a transformation of Honu, and it means the place where there are many turtles, Honolulu. So that's one version that I've heard. I don't think anyone's ever going to know that for sure, but it's interesting. Nonetheless, it's interesting. There's no nesting records here. No, we do have definitely some trash piles, but there could have been areas where turtles nested here in Hawaii before Captain Cook got here, and they were extricated before he got here.
Anything on the whole of it?
No, not a whole lot. There is one record of a man who used to go over there. His family lived on there, and they knew of a turtle or two that nested there. But it was just like a legend kind of thing. So I mentioned the climate issue. This is after a hurricane. You can see the eggs being scattered across the beaches. If you had a historical population that had all this distribution latitudinally, and then now you shrink it in one spot, then the influences of climate can be more significant. I won't get into that. So here's an old menu from the Iolani Palace, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff on here. This is during the Civil War, a long time ago. If you have good eyes, you can read. Let me see if I can read this stuff. Yeah, there's definitely turtle on there, which is why I have this one. Where the soup? Yeah, the turtle soup, right? So you see, they really tried to be French. It was really interesting how everyone tried to have like really Frenchy kind of stuff. But you see, one of the things that you see on here is golden plover, which is not a huge surprise. And all the cool birds you see flying around here, hey, that's food, right? So this is the Royal Palace. But there was a turtle fishery here. They didn't catch as many turtles as you might think. This is the records over time. Basically, if you look at it by the amount of, they usually measure fisheries in the pounds of fish that are landed, not the number of fish. So same with turtles. But we converted it because there were records of both. So if you look at when the fishery was most productive, it was the end. So this is about 1948 to 1974. We have the records for that. So when Hawaii was becoming a very significant territory, the records were being taken up until the Endangered Species Act. So it was most productive at the end when they produced the most poundage of turtles, but the most number of turtles, about 350, were taken, or 370 in the first year. So this is what I want to tell you. 26 years, 2,431 turtles. That's about, 92 turtles a year. It's actually not that much. Really small scale fishery. So there was a fishery here, but it was small scale. As we say, small kind, right? Small kind fishery. And that's actually pretty interesting if you think about it. If you think of fisheries, think about how many tuna they're pulling in here, how many swordfish they're pulling in, how many opa they're pulling in, how many lobster they're pulling in. This is nothing by comparison. The spatial distribution, a lot of it's over here on Maui Nui. We're obviously right here. These little spatial units are determined by the state of Hawaii. So this is not like those. I didn't come up with those shapes or anything. Most of the time, they're catching juvenile turtles, and it was usually an occasional activity of a boat. A boat would go out and set some lobster pots. They catch some opaka, and then they catch turtle if it was opportunistic. A few people went out there and just specialized in turtle, but it was uncommon. Like I said, about a turtle taken every 4 days. That's really not a whole lot to think about it. What's interesting about that is if you break down this series by the major markets, Honolulu, Kahului, Hilo, you see it's initially very productive and then it drops off. And then it just kind of disappears until about 10 years after statehood, and then it pops up again. But if I just looked at this one right here and we never looked at these other ones, you'd say, wow, that's kind of interesting. Why this kind of big convex thing? It's initially hugely productive and it drops off. And then if you look at the productivity, it kind of moves to all the surrounding neighboring nearshore areas. After this drops down, it kind of move over to the neighbor areas, and then it still drops down, and then it kind of moves up. And then finally, they move offshore, where they're basically catching them outside, probably with big nets and stuff, and they're doing other things, and they're helping to catch turtle too. Now, this is really interesting. What this suggests is that there's like this serial movement from, this is a classic overexploitation story. I start in this little square, I eat everything up in it, and then I need to move on to this one. And then I eat everything up in this one, and then I move on to this one, and then I eat everything up and I move on. If I was sustainable, I'd never need to leave this tile, right? This is not a trend that suggests sustainability, right? It suggests overexploitation, and then if I'm going to keep up with the market, I'm going to have to move on. And this is a thing that people often do in fisheries called CPUE, or catch per unit effort. If I put out 10 hooks, I get 1 fish. If I put out 20 hooks, I get 2 fish. If I put out 30 hooks, I get 3 fish, right? I'm getting it, even though I'm catching 3 fish now, and I was catching just 1 fish before, I'm tripling my effort. So I'm getting the same return. This shows that if you standardize the effort, they initially catch a lot, and then it just drops down, even though they're expanding out to all these new areas. Now, if you look at the weight of the turtles, what's fascinating is the turtles are initially small and kind of stay that way until this end part here, until this ramp up. And then at the end, the weight pops up. Now, this is average weight of the turtles caught in the end is 80 kilograms. That's very significant. That's a big turtle. The average, the biggest turtle we've ever caught in our nearshore capture effort, when we go into the water and catch turtles, we do it by hand, we don't do it by nets, is about 86 kilograms. The biggest one we've ever caught. This is what we usually catch. Something about the turtles that we caught 3 turtles here in January. The biggest one was 27 pounds, right? That's pretty normal. The small turtles that we usually catch, right? Because, so what would happen here that the fishery is moving all about, expanding out from the major urban areas into these less populated areas and then finally offshore. The average turtle they're catching at the end is the largest turtle we've ever caught in our capture efforts. What we think is what's happening is they're changing their tactics over time. They're usually using like hooks and spears, and they finally moved to these things called turtle nets, which are these things that could be 200 feet long, and they basically are just trawling the bottom. They have many people work it, and nothing escapes it, right? And what we think is when they're operating near shore with like hand capture, hook, and spears, they're catching the same kind of turtles that we catch when we go out there today. But when they use these big nets and when they go outside the reef, there's a lot bigger turtles. So we think what's happening is they're changing gears, they're changing where they fish, and they're changing the kinds of turtles they're catching. And they're just fundamentally, they can't do the same thing over and over again because they're not going to get any turtles. So all this stuff to us hints at overexploitation.
How's the market? Is there a market?
There's a market, and they are right here. So, yeah, well, this is the interesting part. If I haven't interested you yet, maybe I'll interest you in what we're talking about. So the price for turtle, I mean, this is going to really shock you. The price of things in Hawaii are more expensive than they are in mainland. Have you ever heard that before? So gas, you heard these things in the news right now? Gas is below $2 a gallon in 23 states. And I'm like, I bet one of those is not Hawaii, right? Well, the price of turtle was always more, this is inflation adjusted, by the way, is always more than it is in the mainland. But the revenue that's coming out of this fishery, even when it was the most productive, it was only making $50,000 a year. The fishery, and that's inflation adjusted. That is nothing. This is a small scale fishery. So just think about that. How can you have a small scale fishery on one hand, and then serial overexploitation demanding all these shifts on the other hand? Little effort, big impact. How did both those things be true? So hold on to that for a second. So this is when we see the number of tourists going up here. This is when statehood's in the gray area. This is a per capita income in Hawaii. It's kind of steadily going up. And then this is some stuff that I'll get into more in a second, but this is restaurant demand. We all read in these things in historical turtle literature that, a few places, it's one author that's basically saying this, and they never really justified it. So it was really curious to me. It said, this phrase that you see in these older publications, it said, everyone knows that turtles were overhunted and that it was driven by tourism and restaurant demand. And I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna go get a few restaurant menus because I want to see turtle on the menu, right? Because our consciousness today is like, if we see a turtle, it's a sticker on someone's car. It's a tattoo in their shoulder, right? It's, it's next to little flip-flop stickers in the back of the car, or, it's in the water, or it's on a postcard, or it's in some sort of display case that someone confiscated, right? It's not on a restaurant menu because we don't do that anymore, right? That's illegal. But what we found is that when we tracked all these items, turtle was basically not on the menus. I looked at over 500 menus from, we had some from the Civil War, but it was very few. Basically 1920 to 1975, back when the fishery was really operating, and it just wasn't on there. I went to Bishop Museum, I spoke with private collectors, I went to library collections, KCC, NOAA, other places. I met people on Craigslist and eBay, went to their houses, and went through their garages. Their grandma gave them this box of stuff, or librarians are continuing to send me stuff from the mainland. Stuff shows up in my mail as a restaurant menu. I'm like, what the heck? They're like, hey, I heard you're doing this. Do you want this? But we've scoured a lot of places, and surprisingly, people have thousands of menus in their collections that they didn't let me necessarily see because they're too protective of it. But nonetheless, in all of this work, looking through 500 menus, I'm confident to say that turtle was not on the menu in Hawaii. It was at a few places, and you can dependably find it at a few places, which kind of meets the story that one turtle captured every 4 days in the fishery, right? My parents lived here in the 60s. I talked with people that used to catch turtles in the fishery, the actual turtlers, they called them. We interviewed them. We interviewed kupuna, some elders in the native community that talked about it. So we did a lot of legwork to find this out. And what people said was, yes, we knew some people that caught turtles, but they never sold them to restaurants. They sold them at Wing Sing and Star Market and the farmers markets in Haleiwa, and people bought them over the counter for their own domestic use. There was a restaurant or two that you could dependably go and get turtle soup, but it wasn't there. And some of these menus, I'll show you some pictures of them. They had like a little daily special in the corner sometimes, but often the menus, especially back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when this was really an issue, they printed a special menu for that meal. People come from the mainland of Hawaii, it's a big deal. The menu is for that meal. You go to Manoa Surf Rider, you're paying a little bit of money or a lot of money. You're paying a lot of money today. If you go to Manoa Surf Rider, you get a $17 hamburger, right? It's like Kobe beef or whatever, right? But it's a good hamburger, but you're still paying a lot for it. It was a lot of money back then, but you got a menu for it. And nonetheless, so going to the menus, and I'll wrap up with this, and I want to show you some menus. But here's some data that we actually have for a bunch of different kinds of fish. All of these fish, except for the large pelagics, you can see out here. And these are just different guilds of fish. These are actual real data we have, and there's this break in the axis. It starts in 1948, but then there's a couple records in 1902. So you can see there's this gap, but you can see how the trend kind of sort of matches, except for this one right here. Sort of matches, you see this drop off. But we wanted to fill in that gap, and so when I went and I initially picked up all these menus because I wanted to look for the turtles, but there's all this other stuff on there too that's interesting. All sorts of Hawaiian fish, nearshore fish. Like I said, turtles on a few of them. There's only on 9 menus I saw. 9 out of 500. I think it's about 9. But they're really pretty. They're beautiful. They're often artwork. Sometimes they had like it wasn't just a piece of paper with a print on it, like a lithograph. Sometimes there were watercolors on them. Sometimes there was actually woven grass and stuff in there. It was kind of like multimedia. It was really fascinating. Yeah, I'll get back to that in a second. So here's a menu from the Surf Rider. Everyone's been to Surf Rider, knows where it is. One of the oldest ones down in Waikiki. Beautiful place. This is from 1928. Sunday, January 8th, 1928. Right here, baked pond mullet in tea leaves. Shredded coconut, straw potatoes. Sounds awesome, right? Local fish. And I'll just take you through there's a bunch of weird stuff on here. Like you always see alligator pear. Does anyone ever heard of what alligator pear is? We can call that today an avocado. Right? But there's a lot of funky stuff on here. I had to learn a lot of foods that we don't really eat today. But there's pickled pig's feet on here, kind of stuff. But I'll just take you through so you can get the general idea. Mullet, 1928. Royal Hawaiian, 1932. Kumu. Kumu's out in the reef right here. Goatfish. And when I talk to people who have grew up here and have, they're local people, they're Kama'aina, and they've had generations of Kama'aina, I say, what is your favorite fish? 7 times out of 10, they say kumu. If you've never had it, it's really good. 1932 kumu. Haleiwa Hotel. Looks like a pretty cool place. 1935, Onaga. Red snapper. Black cat. I think this is down near the YMCA, downtown. Yeah, sort of that area. Turtle soup, 20 cents. The prices is interesting too. Volcano House, 1952. Does anyone know what the Volcano House is? I've eaten there, right? Kilauea Crater. What do we have here? We have Mahi Mahi. Royal Hawaiian again, 1955. A lot of stuff. Hapupu. Grouper. The Willows. Right? 1956. I think we're just going to find Opakapaka here. Outrigger. What do we have here? Lobsters. Live Maine lobsters broiled, drawn, or butter arrived by air this morning. New Year's Eve. So $9.50 a person. Now the prices are getting up, but still, if you got that dinner for price fixed for $10 at the outrigger, that's a pretty good deal, right?
The thing is, they wouldn't accept it if it was a rainy morning.
Yeah. So I mean, there's always all these weird things on here. 1972, you see a bunch of different stuff on here. I could go through them again. The point of this, these menus, is this is the information we got from it. This is turtle right here. Very negligible. What we see from this trend, and there's a big gap in all of these official statistics. We think this menu's sort of investigation can kind of fill in this gap, and it does. What we see here is all these reef fish plummet basically after 1930. By statehood, it's not on the menu anymore. And what we see is this huge shift to basically mahi-mahi and tuna. So you go from many species of local fish like kumu and veke and hapupu, and these are just, grouper is the most desired fish in the world. It is the most expensive fish globally. And people try to say, well, no one wants to eat hapupu anymore. Everybody wants to eat grouper. It's just not there. And so what we're seeing is these restaurant menus actually can tell us quite a bit about what's going on in the reef. This is a lot of imported stuff. Shrimps, they were caught in the streams. They were imported from Tahiti and then put into the streams. There were some frog ponds in Kauai, and then a lot of oysters and scallops and stuff brought in. Like you said, live Maine lobster, flown on the previous night. These places bragged about the provenance of their food. They called it hapupu because they wanted people to say, this is from Hawaii, right? They called it opakapaka. They could have just called it pink snapper. They called it opakapaka, and when they called it red snapper, it was kind of like a mistake. Onaga is a Japanese word. It's not a Hawaiian word, right? So you didn't see that on the menus as much, but and then this was covered by NPR, interviewed from the story. But the reason that I think that happened was basically because everyone knows what a menu is. everyone's been to a restaurant. So when we have opportunities to sign this, I can tell you, oh, we can cut up this shell and we can slice it and polish it, and then wham, look at all these lines. Isn't that rad? Well, no one really does that for a living. But everyone's held a restaurant menu in their hands. Everyone understands that experience and what we can draw out from those data. So I think that was part of the reason this story kind of caught fire and stuff. But we're not, as an agency, switching our classic survey methods to abandoning all the ships and everything, just looking at restaurant menus. But what we're trying to do here is just kind of an approach to do things and create it in different ways. So any questions about that stuff?
I think I remember in the 70s maybe Proud Peacock. That was, people would go there just to eat the turtle. I remember eating it in my Bay.
And why Waimea? Okay.
Yeah, it's, so I mean, it must have been the 70s. Because I remember as a kid.
So there was, so I gave you every analysis that I did, except for the restaurant menus, was official state and federal statistics on the fisheries, right? There was, as is today, a relatively undocumented recreational fishery. So when you're growing up here, you could go grab a turtle off the reef in 1965 with no permit. You can't do that today. You can do that for a lot of places. You can go fishing without really any permit, which is in many states unheard of, that you could put anything in the water without a permit. Can't catch trout in North Carolina without 2 different permits, right? But you can go and catch ulua here off the rocks without any permit. You just need to pull, right? So there's an undocumented fishery. We think that was probably on par with the catch. So if I told you 2,431 turtles were taken in that time period, probably it was double that, but half of that was undocumented.
So, the turtle eggs, isn't that? Because I live in Bali most of the year, so I see what they're doing.
They definitely eat the eggs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a reason why maybe the populations had such a hard time rebounding? Is that it was the egg harvest, not necessarily the adult turtles?
In here, the egg harvest doesn't seem to be as a big deal here as it is in other places.
Mhm.
It's not part of the culture as much as it is in other places. In Mexico, in Indonesia,
Right.
in Southeast Asia, the eggs is a very significant issue. The interesting thing about turtle eggs is they're not like a hen egg, like a chicken egg. If you whip them up in a bowl and you pour it into a hot pan, they would not congeal. They don't fully congeal. So you're basically going to have a runny omelet, like a really runny omelet. So what people do is they just eat them raw, or they put them in baked goods because it makes things moister, apparently, because it doesn't fully congeal. So if you make a pastry out of turtle eggs, it's fundamentally different than. But that was not really an issue here. We didn't find a whole lot. I mean, definitely there's records of like shipwrecks in the Northwesterns, and people would live off turtle eggs and stuff like that. But not part of the culture here. Yes.
Where are we at today as far as delisting?
There will be a document released in the next month, and it would have been released already, except there was a complication with a court ruling on wolves, and so they're having to make sure that the ruling that just happened with the wolves, that we're obeying that ruling with this new provision that's coming out. So we did the analysis on this. We completed it a year ago, and the documents have just been held up. So the document's been there. So what we do, I'm part of the science group that assesses things and says, okay, there are this many turtles. The trend is doing this, and the geographic spread of the species is this, right? And therefore, with the threats that we know from disease, from climate change, we expect the population to be doing this the next 100 years, right? We give that to a bunch of lawyers and policy analysts, and then they say, okay, that population is endangered. That population is threatened. That population is delisted. And so I don't do that second part. I only do the first part. And I don't tell them, you need to say and threaten. That's not what we do. It's illegal for us to do that.
You give them the data.
We give them the results of our analysis. We don't give them data.
Okay.
We do in the sense that all of the data are transparent and anybody can have them to do whatever they want with them, to do their own analysis. So in that sense, we do give them the data, but we don't give them the data and expect them to come up with it. We gave them the results of our analysis and then they make a determination. That should come out, proposed ruling will come out in early February-ish, and then there will be a 6-month comment period. You could write in and say, like, I think this is a terrible idea, or I think this is amazing, and the scientists are brilliant, whatever.
Does it do any good? to write in?
No, we have to look at every single comment. We look at them all, believe it. Yeah. So your voice matters.
Okay, good to hear.
Any questions about fishery or menus or turtle shells?
Any tracking on shark eating turtle? By where you get the shark when you investigate?
If anything, the rate of shark-induced injuries in turtles is declining, based on our analysis, which we have not published yet. It's certainly been an issue because you may have seen some turtles in the paper or Hawaii fishing news. There's more sharks here today because there's more turtles, and so we should kill some turtles so there wouldn't be as many sharks. Ever seen that?
Yes.
It's popped up a few times. And we have found the incidence, the population of turtles is going up. But the population of sharks that comes, the tiger sharks, and there are actually white sharks here in Hawaii too. So great whites are here in Hawaii. They follow the whales when they come down from California. They've tracked the sharks. They put tracking devices on the great whites, and they put tracking devices on the whales. And the whales are coming here at the surface, all their pods, and the sharks are like 200 feet below them, coming from California as well. So they're here. There's videos. Go on YouTube and look for white shark videos. Some pretty fascinating stuff from people's. You know those kayak fishermen who go out on the go for mahi or ahi or whatever, and they had some issues pulling in their catch sometimes because the sharks take them.
Yeah.
Some interesting footage there. White sharks. Any other questions?
I guess to move on from what we were just wiped out, can it overpopulate and what are the consequences?
So I mentioned to you before, this is very important. I mentioned to you how on the one hand can we have a very small scale fishery, and on the other hand have this seemingly like not even close to sustainable, exploitation or fishery. And that's because we think when the fishery began in 1948, the population was already heavily overexploited. Going back to those maps I showed you with the black triangles and the white circles, there's many white circles and few black triangles. We think if there was many white circles, there could have been sustainable fishery in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but there wasn't. The population was already hit very hard by that time. Population in Hawaii, green turtles, it's isolated. You put a satellite tag on a turtle in Hawaii, it does not leave Hawaii. You put a satellite tag on a turtle in Florida, goes up to Massachusetts, goes to the Bahamas, goes into Mexico. They don't do that here. They stay in Hawaii. So there's no cavalry coming to rescue. There's no turtles from Guam, no turtles from Samoa, no turtles from California. It's just Hawaii's turtles, right?
I mean,
So
if they could, I guess my question is, if it did overpopulate, what would that be? What's the problem? Would there be a problem?
would there be a problem? I think having looked at this issue historically of the population over centuries and looking at like what's the baseline? What do we need? What the question I ask is, what do we need for the population to be recovered? What do we need for that to happen? And what I would like to see is significant nesting, more like those white circles. Were the evidence of where we knew they nested at. If they used to nest there and the population, we have this phrase, evolutionary significance and stability. We want some evidence of something over a long period of time to show that stability, right? And if there is a population unit that has that kind of breadth and kind of has those numbers, we'd like to see that here. So the question is, I don't know what's going to happen. Is the population here going to be threatened still? Is it going to be endangered? Is it going to be taken off the list? If it remains threatened or it goes up to endangered, then they're going to have to put in a recovery plan. And the recovery plan is going to say, this, and this need to happen, and then we can take the species off the list. I don't know what they're going to do. We'll be involved with that, critical habitat, nesting, and stuff like that. They may translocate, they may move some animals, they may shut the sea life park operations down. I don't know what they're going to do. But that's not for us to decide.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.